Students, what was the biggest teacher meltdown you have ever witnessed? I don't know if it really counts, but our former Latin teacher once slapped a kid across the face because the kid made fun of her dead husband. She got suspended shortly afterwards. I hope the kid was also suspended. I don't remember it correctly, but I don't think he was. Junior year in university, my genetics professor was in the middle of a lecture when authorities took him out of the auditorium, thank goodness, and informed him that his wife, the dean of our college, had been struck and killed by a motor vehicle that morning. He retreated to his office and proceeded to tear the place apart as if a tornado had gone through it. He ripped the top of his desk off of its frame and pulled down all of his bookcases, books, pages, papers, all sorts of documents and furniture strewn everywhere in pieces. By the time I graduated, he still wasn't the same man as he was before that awful day. To be fair, that's a pretty solid reason to tear apart an office if there ever was one. In high school, our government teacher freaked out on my class. We had a few talkers in the back corner, but they finally broke him. He flipped his podium lectern over and started screaming at us. He called us the worst group of kids he'd ever had to teach, and that he was 110% accurate that we were going to be nothing. Then he went to his desk and drank his entire thermos of coffee. A few years later, he was having a retirement party at his house. I was a close friend with his son. He revealed that the thermos was 80% alcohol and 20% coffee. What the heck is wrong with that guy? Drinking coffee and alcohol in front of all those students? What if they found out? He could have been a terrible influence on them for the rest of their lives. Whiskey goes in coffee, not alcohol. He's onto something though. Alcohol adds a bit of sweetness to the coffee without altering the actual taste too much. I tried whiskey in there and I preferred alcohol. Source: divorce. Maybe not a meltdown per se, but I had a chemistry class that was held in a huge auditorium with really steep stairs. The professor always walked all around the room while we took quizzes and tests. One day, he tripped halfway up the auditorium stairs and took a hell of a fall. He landed face down unhurt, apart from bruises on the floor, and before we could really react, he starts banging his fists on the floor and screaming, "Entropy! Entropy! Entropy!" That sounds like a recovery. Sounds like a measurement of chaos. In primary school, some kids were misbehaving and she broke down into tears, started screaming and threw a chair. We never saw her again. She turned into one of the kids. Year 9 maths class. Our teacher was off sick and an early 20s substitute teacher came in to cover. She was lovely, kind, and friendly, although a bit timid and shy. One girl in our class used a fountain pen to flick ink on a skirt she was wearing one day. The poor woman noticed her do it, didn't say a word, and just went to her desk, put her head in her hands, and sobs, doesn't move for 10 minutes at least. Eventually, a friend of mine goes to get another teacher. The sub was escorted out, still crying, and was seen for the rest of the day just crying in her car. Didn't move for another 4 hours or so. It was probably her only work outfit, and she wasn't making enough to buy anything else to wear. Similar thing happened with a new sub in high school. They have it rough. I'm starting to think teachers deserve more tips than any other jobs. I had a Spanish teacher in middle school that was so tired of us turning in broken Spanish on our homework assignments that she screamed at us and called us stupid Americans before throwing pieces of chalk at us one after the other. Another time, she got on her knees and started praying the rosary in front of us when a girl said, "El pollo nugget." El pollo nugget. Haha! That sounds like me after 6 years of French. Le microwave pour l'hétable food. I did pass that year, 53%. We had a physical education teacher who sweat whenever sexual subjects were raised. He ended up having to be a substitute teacher for one of our sex ed lessons. We were very aware of his discomfort discussing the subject and asked him lots of in-depth questions, making sure we used all the correct anatomical terminology. The guy had a Class A anxiety attack. Pity no one had taught us about those, and I was genuinely afraid he was going to have a heart attack. Red face, profuse sweating, breathing difficulty, and a look of primal terror in his eyes. We got the early mark we were fishing for, but I think we did the poor fellow some real emotional damage. We had a religion teacher who loved the sex talk. We were 15 in an all-girl Catholic school in Ireland, so you can imagine how off-limits sex talk was. Our sex ed was a discussion on menstruation and pretty much nothing else, because sex is bad, yo. So we got this substitute religion teacher one day. Only male teacher in the school. He's crazy for the sex talk. Starts telling us stuff about STDs and how you can catch them from sitting on a toilet, how sex works, how much men love sex, all while getting into a sweat. To top it all off, he used his hands to demonstrate how to use a condom. Apparently, you should stretch it one end in each hand, as far as your arms will stretch before using it. After that, I spoke to our normal religion teacher. He was subbing her because she was doing exam work with another grade, because he was giving such bullcrap information. Turns out he'd called a 13-year-old chick sexy too, so he was fired. I was in the band. One day, one of the regular, always in trouble disruptive students was being extra disruptive while the director was trying to tell us something important. So after about 5 different times of going the normal route to get him to settle down, he cracked. It got quiet and then the director bellowed, "Student's name! Are you stupid or just don't give a crap?" The whole room was quiet. All eyes were now on the disruptive kid who was then trying to hide behind his tuba, and then the director continued with his announcement like nothing happened. Of course it was the tuba player. Bunch of misfits they are. I played trombone, so I'm well versed in the ways of the low brass mafia. My 8th grade algebra teacher, also a German teacher, Mr. Cogburn, was an interesting guy. He was tall, had a kind of wild-looking frizzy gray hair and beard, and had a sort of boisterous, larger-than-life kind of personality. He started every class by slamming the door and yelling. He yelled, or as I would realize once I got into theater in high school, he projected through the entire class period, though he never really came across as intimidating. He always had a yardstick in his hand that he would slap forcefully against the blackboard to emphasize what he was saying. He would also slap it against the desks of students who weren't paying attention, though he was exceedingly careful to not actually hit the student. It wasn't terribly uncommon for him to break yardsticks, and there was always another in the supply cabinet to replace the one that he'd broken. He had a little song and chant that he made up for remembering the slope-intercept form of an equation for a line that I will probably remember until the day I die. He also gave the most effective, and to 8th graders both hilarious and embarrassing, explanation of how to divide fractions. He stood on a desk and told us, always divide the top. Here he pointed at his head, by the bottom. Here he turned around and pointed at his own ass. Never divide the bottom, because the bottom, here he helpfully gestured up and down the length of his ass, is already divided. That's what Mr. Cogburn was like. He was big and loud and crazy, but not in a scary way. We told new students that the way to tell he was actually mad was as if he started the class by shutting the door like a normal person and speaking quietly, and that was when they should be scared. Now we get to the story of the meltdown. Every year, our school did an event called a mathathon. Students were given math worksheets and tried to solve as many math problems as they could in a set amount of time. People, usually the parents, would sponsor the students, pledging a certain amount of money for each problem correctly solved, and at the end, the money was donated to a local charity that helps the disabled. It was that time of year, and Mr. Cogburn was explaining the mathathon to my class, and when he got to the part about the charity and what they did, one boy, who probably thought himself incredibly cool and edgy, loudly said, "I don't know why anyone bothers to help those R words. We should just let them all die." And Mr. Cogburn transformed. As I said before, the dude was tall, well over 6 feet, but his height never came across as imposing at all. Now he loomed over that student's desk like the goddamn angel of death. He seemed to physically radiate pure rage. I swear to all that's holy, you could feel his outrage coming off of him in waves. Even though he was focused solely on that one boy, students halfway across the room sank down in their chairs in pure terror, trying to disappear under their desks. I know because I was one of them. We couldn't even look at him. Not out of the usual, crap, he's mad, don't make eye contact instinct most people have, but more like it was a form of physical protection. He was a burning sun of anger, and if we looked directly at that sun, it might blind us. He spoke very, very quietly to the boy for about a minute. I didn't make out what he said. Then he led the kid out of the room and shut the door. About a quarter of the class started crying as soon as he left. After a while, the other math teacher came in and taught for the rest of that period. What we all found out later, and which none of us, including that boy, had known, was that Mr. Cogburn's daughter, who he spoke about to us frequently enough, was not his only child. He and his wife had also had a son that was born extremely physically disabled, and who had died at a very young age from health complications arising from those disabilities. When he took that student out of the room, I think we all thought he was going to kill him. He actually just took him down to the principal and explained what the kid had said, and the kid was suspended for a day. Mr. Cogburn also took the rest of the day off. So that was the biggest meltdown I ever saw from a teacher, and it was sort of an inverse of a normal meltdown. When he was shouting, gesticulating wildly and hitting our desks with yardsticks, we loved the guy and feared nothing. But that day he got so quiet, we felt mortal terror. Agree. Amazing story. Much respect for that teacher. This was in high school. We had a band teacher. His nickname was Pinky because he had very red hair and pale skin with a red tint, borderline albino. Every time he got mad, his entire face turned tomato red. I don't remember the sequence of events, but he was already frustrated. Everyone in the room knew to shut up so that we didn't piss him off. Well, everyone except this one dippy girl. She asked something along the lines of, "Are you mad?" and kept pestering him. He finally snapped. His face turned that familiar shade of tomato red, and he threw the pencil that he was using to conduct across the room. He then stormed out and slammed the door hard enough that it could be heard on the other side of the building. He quit soon after. I've seen it firsthand. Being a high school band director is hard enough without kids trying to intentionally bother you. A lot of band teachers at the high school level quit after a few years. The band director I work for in the fall has to deal with so much crap from parents, it's ridiculous. A lot of the parents are pretty cool, but there's always at least one crazy a year. So being a band teacher is similar to the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher? We had an art teacher in year 7, 11 years old, who would lock himself in the supply cupboards and scream and rip his hair out. It was unsettling. It's his art. I had an art teacher, we'll call him Bob Smith, who would write his own quotes on the board, like in this format. I'm just making something up, but it was cheesy like this. "The only limits to your imagination are the ones you put on it." Quote by Bob Smith. It was super cringy. Not so much a breakdown, but a break in normal behavior for sure. Our freshman English teacher was a small, soft-spoken woman who was kind of known to be a teacher that you could walk all over with little, but not no repercussions. We were in a review session after school, and some upperclassmen were just hanging out in the hallways making lots of noise, so she was constantly poking her head out into the hall asking them to be quiet. As we are all very silent reading or something, the classroom door absolutely slammed shut, so hard the latch didn't have time to catch, and the door bounced back open. The teacher immediately yells, "Oh, hell no," kicks off her heels and takes off out the door. She caught up with the kid who had taken a running start and kicked the door shut, and berated him for a good 10 minutes, which we could hear clear as day from the end of the hall. It was like nothing that we'd ever heard from her. Yeah, you know, when the heels come off, serious crap is about to go down. Pursuit mode has been engaged. In high school, I turned in a form to my science teacher a day late. She screamed at me, walked out of the classroom, and was gone for nearly an hour. The class had started and everyone had speculations, blaming me for what happened. The teacher comes back, joyful and smiling, and says she just needed to walk around campus to recover. I'm surprised they blamed anyone for the teacher leaving. My high school would probably have thrown a party. If this was physics, and during the last year of high school, my peers would have been mad. I taught public high school for 7 years and have been teaching at a university ever since. Every time one of these threads pops up, I expect to find the story of how I once broke down in tears when a cell phone rang in class, or the time I threw up in a trash can, brushed my teeth with a bottled water right in front of all 42 of them, asked a janitor to come down and take the trash out, and went back to teaching after my favorite student of all time faked barfing noises because he knew it would make me puke. For future reference, brushing your teeth after vomiting is a very bad idea. Rinse with water or mouthwash, but don't brush or rub your teeth. The acid in your vomit softens your teeth, and brushing them while they're soft can strip away a lot of the enamel, which is bad. Likewise, don't brush within 30 to 60 minutes of eating. Holy crap, I always do that to get the horrible taste out though. If I didn't have mouthwash, would me just rubbing toothpaste all over my mouth have the same effect? 10th grade was in math class, and the teacher was getting frustrated, and not everyone was understanding a problem that he made various threats on that he would do if we didn't figure it out. More homework, tests, etc. I kept asking questions because I legitimately didn't understand, and he yelled, "Oh, heck's sake," and threw an eraser at me. I got up and left. Never ratted him out, and the next day he was super patient with everyone. It was his, "Oh, I screwed up" moment. Reminds me of my math teacher in high school. A sweet old man just a few years from retirement, but not teacher material. His idea of teaching was that if you didn't understand something, he would explain it to you again, with the same words, in the same order, multiple times. He just could not understand why we had difficulty understanding his explanations. Sounds like my math teacher. Her lessons plan was to have the page from our textbook blown up on the screen. She would then read it. If anyone asked for help, she would then read it to them slowly. Had a sub in 5th grade. I was a really unorganized kid, and having to dig through my desk for crap wasn't uncommon. She got all towering and told me this was unacceptable, dumped my desk in front of me and told me I was staying in from recess to organize it. The whole class revolted, and a neighboring teacher came in to see what was up. The sub claimed I was being lippy and this was my punishment. Then the whole class spoke up and informed him of what really happened, and we were all let out for recess. Came back in and a lunch lady was sitting at the teacher's desk instead. As the kid who was always picked on by everyone, it was nice to see the whole class stand up for me that day. This is an awesome story. People who go on power trips, especially when over children. A university professor, actually. She would teach and constantly complain about 3 girls who sat near the back for talking or being on their phones. One day she made a big scene, took down their names, and left dramatically. This was a huge lecture hall of 100+ students. I heard them laughing once, but never anything else. I found her fixation on these 3 intolerable. During the exam, the rooms were organized, what seemed to me as horribly by last names. Not alphabetical, random last letters in different groups. She had seated the 3 in the same room and loudly spoke during the exam for a few minutes to distract them, except there were 40+ people in the room. I'm still bitter because it really distracted me. The teacher didn't handle that very well, but as a professor, myself, nothing pisses me off more than a group huddle and people around with their devices during a lecture. If I was a teacher and out to get them, I would have made sure they sat next to each other and wait for one of them to speak to the other and call it cheating and eject them from the test room. After our class picture, our first-year teacher declared, "New rule, every day is now class picture day. I want to see smiles from each and every one of you every single day." The class let out a collective groan and the teacher said, "Come on, turn those frowns upside down." She kept at us for a good month on the smile policy. Keep in mind that this was during the 90s. The class was divided evenly amongst goths, grunge, and gangstas. The only thing we agreed upon was that smiles were for pussies. The meltdown came one day when she brought in her karaoke machine and attempted to sing Tim McGraw's "Just to See You Smile." We just sat there stone-faced as usual, then she tried to ham it up just to get us to laugh, but nothing. We were all too tough to show any humor or heart. And then she broke down and started blubbering, "I just wanted to smile. Is that too much to ask?" Apparently it was because none of us had the goddamn common courtesy to offer her a tissue. The next day, she went resting bish face on our asses, and the word on the street is that she hasn't cracked a smile in 20 years. Wow, you witnessed the breaking moment. Decades from now, her students will still wonder what shattered her goodwill so utterly and irretrievably. Junior year of high school, I decided to take a psychology class. The administration switched a lot of teachers around that year and hired a lot of new ones too, so I didn't know anything about him. As the semester goes on, his behavior starts slipping and the class starts noticing. He begins to lose his patience more and more frequently when the class doesn't respond to a question immediately. His behavior then progressed to him throwing whiteboard markers at students for not paying attention or answering incorrectly. Then one day, about half of the way into the semester, he completely loses it. A group of 3 students laughed at something within their own conversation just as class was starting, and our teacher saw and made a comment to the class that if we weren't going to listen, he would make today hell. Some kids spoke up saying he would go to the principal if he did anything to hurt the class, so the teacher began throwing markers, erasers, and anything he could find at the student. The student got up to leave for the principal's, and the teacher stood up on his desk and screamed at us. He ran to the front of the classroom, where the student who spoke out was, picked up a desk and threw it at the student. Thankfully, it didn't hit him, but the teacher ran to the door to prevent anyone from leaving and said if anyone told anything about that day to anyone, he would ruin our lives. Some friends and I told the principal and administration, and I actually had to go into court to testify. Turns out the guy suffers from schizophrenia as well as some degree of PTSD after serving in the military. I don't remember what ended up happening with him. At the time, I really didn't care to know. Bummer. I really wanted to hear this end with something like, at the end of the semester, he tied his erratic behavior to a lesson plan. Some kind of Dead Poets Society crap or something. We had a psych teacher in 11th grade that, fake, reversed graded the first big exam. All the smart kids did bad and didn't understand why. The couple broke down. He quickly blended that into the next lesson and handed out the proper grades at the end of class. That's cool and all, but imagine getting a 98 just to realize you actually got a 57. My super dorky history teacher in 8th grade was the nicest teacher I've ever met, but there were a couple of class clowns in our class, and he usually dealt with them okay. One day, though, they were obnoxious to the entire class from the moment he walked in, and he snapped, yelling and chucking his stapler across the room. He nailed a staple right into Ben Franklin's forehead. He immediately apologized and went about his day normally, while all the students went silent. Nobody ever bothered him again after that day. Surprised Ben didn't go to the principal about that. Ben Stapleton was never the same after that event. In my elementary school, there was this one super obnoxious kid named Lance, who was constantly goofing off and all of that. Though in all honesty, he probably had ADHD without a good support system. Most of our teachers were used to dealing with him, but one day we had this substitute named Mr. Blake, who had no idea what to do with him and all of our class. He was mouthing off every other moment and jumping around like crazy when she starts to boil over and yells at Lance to sit down, which he does. He then calls her a bish or something under his breath, and she finished her transformation into a boiling tomato. She yells, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" which blew our little elementary school minds and then very violently shook his desk. The thing was, Lance had a blood condition that made him bruise very easily and very dramatically. When she shook his desk, he started crying, understandably, because he was getting these massive purple-black bruises all over his legs. She was banned from our school after that. That's awful. When I was in year 2, there was a kid with a similar condition, so even if he got the tiniest bit scratched or bruised, he would have to go to the hospital. I had a history teacher in high school. For context, this was in about 1980. To this day, I can't quite recall what prompted this, but he stood in front of the entire class shaking with rage and said, "I am a homosexual." We were all just dumbfounded. Not that he was gay, I think most of us had figured that out already, but that he felt obligated to make that announcement. "Michael, you can't just say homosexuality and expect everything to be better." "I did not say it, I declared it." 8th grade math teacher was well known for his short temper, but this particular day was bad. There was a kid in my class, Justin, that never listened and never did his homework. One day, the math teacher just had it with Justin, grabbed his desk with him in it, and picked it up and slammed it back down on the ground a few times. After that, he shoved the desk with Justin in it across the room. Justin was fine, thankfully. The math teacher just stormed out, told my mom, and I guess a few other parents called the school about it too. He was gone for a few weeks and had to take anger management classes. I just went by my old middle school a few weeks ago, and he's the assistant principal now. Who would have expected that? He got promoted to management. Probably not a bad idea. Must have been anger management classes. Hey there! Thank you for watching until the very end. If you have a similar experience or story, feel free to put it down in the comments section below. We'd love to hear about it. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe, and stop by the channel to check out another amazing video.